Israel, Hamas, the tension, natural disasters, earthquakes, things like AI. It's getting stronger, more powerful. Is all of this showing us that we're living in the end times? Can we actually predict the end?
I think a lot of people get freaked out about the end times, and they get freaked out about Revelation, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's a horror story. It's a wedding. It's beautiful. There's something happening. The biggest party of all time is about to happen.
What is the mark of the beast? What are the views on this? How should we understand that?
I would probably be more in this camp where it's like, oh, I've read the end and I'm good, and so I don't need to pay attention to it. And that's wrong too.
Scripture telling us all of this. What should we feel?
Jesus is returning, and so there's going to be a judgment. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be ready? This is going to be the granddaddy of them all.
This is the granddaddy of them all. And so we've had 5 other episodes that with some great questions, great topics that you can go back on and watch through. But today, we really want to know if we're living in the end times.
Yeah.
So a really easy one to tackle pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
And so really, if you look around our world today, you think about Israel and the wars going on, Hamas, the tension. You think about natural disasters, earthquakes. I even think about things like AI, because something like this that's getting stronger, more powerful. Like, what could it potentially do globally for us with something like AI?
Everybody's scared about it, but they still love using it.
Oh, yeah.
I asked ChatGPT the question about itself. So, you are you trying to take over the world, ChatGPT?
What did it say?
It said no.
Oh, okay.
So it didn't give me any context. It said, "Don't worry,
That's what it would
stay
say.
calm,
Yeah.
stay calm. Everything's under my control."
Want you to think.
So, I'm wondering, is all of this showing us that we're living in the end times? Is that kind of what's happening here?
The answer is simple. As long as there's Chick-fil-A, we are not at the end.
As long as it's still closed on
As
Sunday.
long as it's still around and it's giving us very solid chicken, Christian chicken, then we're good. But as soon as you see that goes down, bam,
It's the sign.
we are sliding quick. Yeah, quickly.
Josh, how do you feel about Chick-fil-A? No.
Love
End
Chick-fil-A.
times. Sticking on this. So
Number one with the lemonade. So yeah, kind of to answer your question. So, I think every generation probably thinks they're in the end times in some way, right? Like the early church who got the book of Revelation, when they heard that, they certainly would have thought they were in the end times. And there's probably a bunch of stuff we'll get into that kind of shows some of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's like helpful. I think we're always like looking for the story that we're in, right? And like the end of that story even. And so I think it's even just helpful to like take a look back and think like, man, there were dozens of other generations and times where they thought it was the end, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like, dude, can you imagine?
1000 AD was a big one. It was like the turning of the millennium since Jesus. So people were like, okay,
Here
it's
it goes.
done. Yeah.
Does it switch over? We're not sure.
1066, Battle of Hastings, because it was Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet came at the same time.
They had, like,
and
no
of
idea what it
course, wasn't it the French that were taking over? Like, the French are coming into England. What are we going to do?
The world has changed a little bit.
Now we got to have French fries. Yeah, it was pretty bad.
think,
is
like,
the French
even-
fries actually a French thing?
No.
No. Okay.
Not
That's
really.
an American thing with the French name.
We just,
We just
do that label
Bad
on it.
branding.
Yeah. The Black Plague.
Yeah, bubonic plague, dude. Can you imagine?
That was big.
That's
A
nuts.
third of Europe. A third of the population gone. We all lost our minds with COVID, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine if a third of us were gone?
Yeah.
That's like Endgame. Or
Yeah.
I guess Infinity War would be more like people just dying left and
Dying,
right.
yeah.
Ugh, horrible.
Yeah. American Civil War. Can you imagine that? Killing your own countrymen.
Yeah.
Slavery, like all the slavery that was involved in that.
Dude.
The world wars.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say,
Yeah.
my kid, like, if there were ever a time when I was convinced, okay, this is the end, it would have been in the 1930s. So, think about it. Hitler is gaining popularity. He's starting to mass more and more people. So he would be like the Antichrist.
It's out of the Great Depression, too.
Great Depression.
Yep.
The whole world, all the markets have collapsed. And because of that, there's great famine everywhere. Not only was there great famine everywhere, the western half of the United States went through a severe drought. They called it the Dust Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
So we weren't able to produce as much. So like more famine, want. There are wars and rumors of wars. There's all kinds of natural disasters that are going on. And then, of course, Hitler is now moving in and he's pursuing the final solution with the Jewish people. Like like targeting God's people.
Yeah.
Man, if there were ever a time,
Yeah.
Mm.
You think World War II, right? Holocaust, 6 million Jews. just gone.
tens of millions of other people. Like
Yeah,
in Europe,
70 to
Stalin.
85 million is what they estimate from
Wow.
World
Oh my
War II.
gosh.
People killed. And then, like you said, to top it off, we developed the atomic bomb, and then we used the atomic bomb
Yeah.
twice.
Yeah, yeah.
And we've kind of like opened this door to, hey, this is like the future of warfare. Do we even have the self-restraint to like not use it
And
now?
not to say that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of conversation behind that, whether we should or shouldn't. But I'm not saying America's wrong or right or anything like it, but it's just, it probably propelled us into a time where I would imagine that, got to vote, that's my favorite time for when.
When you would have predicted it?
Yeah, that would have probably been.
Not your favorite time to be alive. Okay, so what I'm hearing us say too is we can look back in history and see some pretty awful times, pretty atrocities in humankind, and that people would almost rightfully say, "Is this it? Is this the end?" Like millions of people are dying. There's world wars, and so I guess what I'm wondering is, can we actually predict the end?
And see, you weren't here during our last discussion when we're listening to all these guys that are like pulling the trigger on, this is the end, this is the end, and they were just dead wrong. And of course, there was one of my favorites was Harold Camping. You remember Harold Camping?
I have no idea who you're talking about.
You don't know Harold Camping?
Enlighten me, John.
We didn't either. Don't worry.
Oh, you serious? You've never heard of him?
No, you were informing us last.
You would
episode.
love this guy. The people would call in all the time, and he'd be like, "Thank you for your question," and he would just like answer, and he would give all these answers. And I listened to him for years, and I thought he was awesome. And then in 1994, he's like, "This is the end. We know it's going to happen. It's going to happen in September." I was interning at a church. This guy Eugene Miller over at Living Hope up in Dublin, PA. He circled his calendar in September. And he's like, Rapture season, because we were just joking, like, whatever. But that's when he said it would happen. It didn't happen. And then he said, well, maybe I got the dates wrong. And he readjusted it, I think, to 2011. And then readjusted it again to 2012. 3 times the guy was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I feel like with this, historically, whether it's us as Christians or just people of faith, don't have a good track record. I think we kind of treat it almost like that one person, everyone's like, hey, don't date them.
Mm-hmm.
And your family's like, don't date them. Like, they're bad news. And your friend's like, don't date them. And you're like,
Right.
well, I'm different. Like, I can change it, right? Like, I can figure out the end. I think we do that sometimes
He's a
with this.
wounded bird.
You
I
know,
can
like,
fix him.
We like Nicolas Cage, like National Treasure our way through. Like, well, maybe I can
Dude.
excuse my way through this thing. And figure it
Nice
out.
reference. That's
I
one
knew
of
that
my
one.
favorite movies.
I got you, bro.
Because you know what? Listen, that should be a theme of this particular program because he figures it out with all these clues and stuff like that. That's exactly what people get all amped up about when they read Revelation. They're like, oh, okay. It must be the next clue.
Right.
I'm trying to do my best Nicolas
Nicolas Cage
impression.
impression.
But we make that mistake, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I mean, scripture's pretty clear. I
Yeah.
mean, we see this in Matthew, we see this in Mark, that Jesus is like, hey, only the Father knows.
Yeah.
And
What is the reference on that?
I think
It's-
I have
Matthew 24.
Mark
Matthew 24.
13.
Yep.
So you guys know the kind of history on that? It bears, I mean, it's a good story, right? Can I
Go
tell
for
the
it.
story?
Yeah, please.
You're my timekeeper. You're cut me off.
I'm watching.
Shut up already.
Mark
So
13.
he's referencing, and then it also comes up again, I think, when he's in John 14. He's like, look, I go to prepare a place for you. And Jesus is talking about, like, there will be a fateful day when he returns for us, but he's going to prepare a place for us. All of this is like wedding language. And so in ancient Israel, the people, the parties would come together, and it was usually arranged, but the arrangement could involve people that actually liked each other and knew each other, maybe were like good friends. But the families would come together. They would sign a ketuvah, which is like a contract, like a marriage contract. They would like exchange a couple cups of wine, and they would like the priest would bless the union so that now they were engaged. They were betrothed, but it wasn't like married. They were engaged, and then the husband or the man would go off, the fiance would go off to his house, and he would build onto his house. It was the marriage chamber, the bridal chamber, where he would actually live. And so they would build on to the father's house. And then the woman would go and she would learn how to cook, clean, and sew. And, I always say, like, that's how it ought to be. It's just the way it was. But she would learn like matronly type of things. But they would separate for about a year. And then the man would work on this chuppah, like the bridal chamber, this thing that was connected to the father's house. And it would take a while. So about almost a year into it, he would be almost finished. And he would come to his father, every day, maybe every week, whatever, and say, Father, is it almost yet? And only the Father knew.
Mm.
So only
Oh,
the
wow.
Father would inspect everything, and he knew when the fateful day was for his
Mm.
son to have permission to go and find his wife.
Mhm.
So when it talks about that in Matthew 24, it's like only the Father knows the day or the hour. Some people struggle with that because they're like, why did Jesus not know?
Mm.
Why did he subordinate himself to the Father and say, well, why can't Jesus know this information in the Father? But it's all nested in bridal language.
Mm.
It's all nested as a groom. And he purposely does not know because he wants to live in relationship with the Father
Mm.
as the Son, and they want it to be a wedding.
Mm.
Mm.
And see, I think a lot of people get freaked out about the end times, and they get freaked out about Revelation, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's a horror story. It's a wedding.
Mm.
You know, it's beautiful. There's something happening. The biggest party of all time is about to happen
Mm.
in Revelation 20 and 21. On the heels of like all these
Mm.
things that are going to, where sin is going to keep decaying to such a point where everything's horrible. But when the Father finally says, yep, today's the day, then the Son goes and he gets all his groomsmen, and they go through if they were rich, they rode on horses. If they weren't, they just banged pots and pans and ran through the town.
Mm.
And that's why the ladies were all waiting. So like the bride had the bridesmaids, and the bridesmaids roll out there with their lanterns, you know, like their flashlights, just seeing, did he come tonight? Oh my gosh, he's coming tonight, quick. And they'd run back,
Mm.
quick. And she'd wake up, she'd be like, get my makeup, I gotta like look beautiful. And all.
Mm.
So they would get her
Mm.
ready. And so when Jesus is saying like, be ready, it's that image. Like we are the bride, and we are the bridesmaids. Like, is he coming? Is he coming? Just being ready. And so we shouldn't be freaked out. We should be more expectant, excited, like it's
Mhm.
coming. And then of course, when he shows up, again, if he's rich, come my lady, and, you know, gets on the horse. Or, you know, if it's not so well, it probably would have been more like my wedding, where it's like, put her on a
Budget.
chair, run her through town. You know, like, and so, you know, they go, and that's where they have this feast that lasts for 7
Yeah.
days.
Mm.
And that feast, that wedding feast, is what Jesus has in mind in John chapter 14, the whole idea of Matthew's 24, right?
Yep.
Where, man, there's going to be this giant feast at the end of time. And so it's like this podcast, what we should be helping people realize, not so much about dates and times, but more like expectancy. Don't get freaked out.
Yeah.
This isn't like barricading yourself with a shotgun. This is more like, no. We want to make sure we get this message out to other people that there's a huge wedding happening at the end of all this,
Mm.
that God and man, it would be like a bride and a groom, you know,
Yeah.
coming together.
That's great. And so it almost seems like we're saving everyone time by saying, hey, don't look for a date.
Yeah.
Don't look for a moment.
Mhm.
What we're trying to draw out of Scripture is just be ready.
Yeah, but it's too cool. It's too much fun to be
Yeah.
like, yeah, but what are
But what if I knew?
pencils ready?
Yeah.
But there is a flip side of that too, where it's like I think we tend to gravitate towards one or the other, where it's like, oh, you're the Nicolas Cage, you're trying to figure it out,
Mhm.
or you're like, I would probably be more in this camp where it's like, oh, I've read the end and I'm good, and so I don't need to pay attention to
Mhm.
it, and that's wrong too. It's
Mm.
like there's another message he's trying to get across in an urgency, and like you said, kind of that
Good.
that hopeful view of looking at it. Like,
Mhm.
how can I live with expectancy?
Mm.
And I can't do that if I'm just checking out and like I know how it ends.
So Matt Parks, he's one of our communicators, right? And he's the campus pastor up at West Shore. And when we were doing a series with young adults, we were producing our own material on the book of Revelation. And so we were like, cool, you know, let's get into this. And so I asked Matt to do one of the weeks, and he was like, nope. He wouldn't do it.
Touch it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, let's meet at least before you say no.
Mhm.
And I sat down. I'm like, what do you mean you're not going to do it? Like, come on, can you help us out? Can you spare a dime? You know? And so he was just like, I gotta be honest with you, man. It's like it makes me anxious just even thinking about it, because like growing up, we thought Jesus is going to come back any minute. And I think he has this story of like he would come home and he would check to see if his family was still there.
Oh,
Every
wow.
time he
Wow.
came home from school, he'd be like, is everybody still there?
Mm.
So he's like, even now, like I talked to my counselor about this. Like I get freaked out about it. And I'm like, well, let's talk. Like, what do you get freaked out? He's like, oh my gosh, all this death, destruction, God's going to come back. He's going to judge everybody.
Mm.
I'm like, yeah, that's part of it. But like, he's judging the bad stuff.
Yeah.
Like, don't we want the bad stuff judged?
Mhm.
And so we walked through Revelation a little bit. He's like, I didn't learn that growing up.
Mm.
And so it was sad to me, because I mean, maybe in some ways I was insulated because I didn't grow up in the church.
Mm.
And maybe if I had grown up in the church, I'd be freaked out about it. But because
Yeah.
I didn't grow up in the church, all I heard was Harold Camping tell me about Rapture season, September, you know, like it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So I was
I think that's
pretty
real
excited.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's real important what you're saying here, is because someone listening right now is probably in that camp of feeling just anxious about it,
Mhm.
fearful about it.
Yeah.
And so, are you saying that Scripture telling us all of this, what should we feel? I mean, you mentioned a celebration, a wedding. Maybe there's no different way to say it, but like as we're reading this, how should we feel? What should we be pulling out of this? And is it meant to be encouraging, or is it meant to be, hey, spooky a little bit? To feel the urgency. Like, is that part
Well, I
of
think
it?
whenever you ask that question of any book or any writing from the Old New Testament, you can speak into this too, but you got to consider like what was the original intent. And so was the original intent of the Book of Revelation to be written to suburbanites in a coffee shop who have everything they need?
Think so.
Yeah, who are struggling with AI. Or was it intended to be written to people that are suffering persecution and injustice? And when you frame it like that, it's like, okay, so imagine we lived in a version of America where we can't practice our faith. And if we do, we get in trouble for it, or that we got to keep it on the down low and we got to worship in quiet. And people we know have been abused or maybe even killed for their faith. If you read a book that talked about how evil is going to be judged one day, what would it make you feel like?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that make you feel a little bit better?
Absolutely. Be much more encouragement, hope.
Yeah. So the book is written to people of the first century that are struggling, that are like, well, maybe I should give in to Rome. It's like, no. Look, and this is the key. The centerpiece of Revelation 10, 12, 18, 19, 20 is that Jesus comes as the victor, and he's a lamb.
Yeah.
And he comes with his own blood upon him. You know what I mean? Like he won by sacrificing himself. He won by dying. And so it's the encouragement to the martyrs. And martyr in Greek means like witness. And those witnesses got killed. So it's like, no, you win by being killed. So they have no power over you. And it's essentially equalizing, or not so much equalizing, it's putting us on a higher ground of saying, if they kill you, you've won.
Yeah.
So that's where we're supposed to, okay, we don't have to imagine. Now we go to Chick-fil-A, we're sitting down with our Book of Revelation and it'll be like, and there's blood and there's pestilence and disease. And you're like, oh, I don't want any of this.
Yeah.
But these people lived in blood and pestilence and disease. And it's like, even if you go through that, you've won. So it's hope.
If you're already fearing for your life.
Yeah.
Now knowing that, like Philippians 1:21, to live is Christ, to die is gain.
Yeah.
It's a different way to think about it.
Yeah.
We don't really want to think about death at all.
Yeah.
But then when we realize the setting that they would have been in, it would have been like, wow, there's even hope. Even hope in death.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not so much, it shouldn't bring you anxiety. It should bring you out of anxiety.
Yeah.
That there's an equalizer. Like someone comes along and says, I see you, I see what has happened, and I'm going to make it all right.
Yeah.
So the Book of Revelation you were talking about, Matt not want to touch that one.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one to get into.
Yeah.
So disclaimer, people have spent a lot of their pastoral ministry just preaching on Revelation. So where there's no way we're going to get into all of it. And no way.
It's not going to be an 8-hour podcast.
This is a very much let's zoom out and just look at Revelation. How should we approach this book of the Bible?
Well, yeah, again, I think like, not like the Sudoku Rubik's Cube, let me figure it out. I think like, you set the stage so well for us, John. The lens we want to take through it is almost this, when Jesus came here, he started his kingdom, right? And so you'll hear sometimes scholars even talk about his kingdom as being like, it's like an already not yet kingdom. Like, so he came here, he started that, and ever since then, his kingdom's been expanding. I think Bible Project guys do the visual of that where it's like, almost this full circle thing where it's like, hey, if you had two circles, it was heaven and earth, they would overlap at the creation of the world. And then sin separated those two.
Yeah.
And then when Jesus comes back, it's almost like a Venn diagram where it's like the kingdom starts to creep in a little bit. And Revelation is like really the story getting us to the end. It's like, well, those circles are overlapping again. And so when we view it more in a sense of, okay, like how do we get to that point of that hope? And like, how can I be part of even the kingdom of God expanding while I'm here by how I live my life, whether it's in persecution or not? That changes the game for us. And so I think, to start there, first of all, and there's a ton of weeds we can get into, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I think that's the foundation for how
I would
we
say
should
that's
approach
one of the
it.
biggest things that we have a misconception about. And not that,
Sure.
so I got to preface I think we all have to preface this by saying, like, this is our best guess, right? Like, we're not experts. We're not like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen. Anything I say about anything to do with theology, I always put a little caveat on it that, like, you and I, we're gonna enter into heaven at some point. We're gonna be like, oh, oh, okay.
That's how it was.
And so there's doctrine, and what's the next one? It's like Doctrine Center, and
We had
then it's
Core
like,
Center.
yeah.
And then Doctrine was like the next
Right,
layer,
right.
and then Preferences.
Preferences. So like, I don't know, it's somewhere on the outer rim where it's
Mhm.
kind of like, let's get our best impression of what this is, but it's not going to be anything I hold to. Like if I see Jesus come back in a way that's different than I thought, I'm not gonna be like, no, wait, cut, go back, do this again, because this is what we knew. Because I mean, honestly, think about it. When Jesus came the first time, the people who knew the Bible 100 times better than I do, they were completely lost.
That's so
you
true.
know.
Yeah.
So like, I think I know the Bible a little bit. I'm sure I'm lost on a lot of this stuff. However, I think what you're talking about with regard to like the overlapping, the heaven and earth.
Yeah.
So many people, I think they think to themselves, when I die and I go to heaven, it's like I'm going up to this place somewhere in the sky, and I'm going to be able to look down on my grandchildren, and this weird kind of Platonic almost view of the separation of worlds, that the real world is here, and this dreamy kind of cloud-like toga-wearing, strumming lyre, like type of thing. When the Bible's very clear, and it seems like it's very clear in Revelation too, about how heaven is coming to earth. That when we die, that our next conscious thought will be about how God brings heaven to earth again and renews the place. So it's not so much about like escapism, and I think that's where we think like Revelation is all about getting off this planet. We're going to heaven, and whatever the different. What are some good hymns?
I'm just loving the accent. I just think you need to keep that going.
But what are those hymns where it's like one day I'm gonna fly away or something like that?
I'll fly away. Oh,
Come
glory.
on, yeah. I'll fly away. Sing it for us. Come on.
I never grew up in the hymn church actually, so I don't got any of those hymns in my head.
So
right now.
as it got these songs in my head,
Yeah.
it's like I'm gonna fly away.
But it
It's
is
like,
much more drifting away. Like, how do I get out? And
As opposed to
jumping off
I'm coming-
sinking ship.
I'm coming back.
God's not letting the earth sink. He's renovating it. And that's where it's like it talks about like heat, burning elements, even of like completely renovated. And it's weird to think like if that's true, then like where we are right now will one day be the site of heaven. That the Garden of Eden started out here. God's presence started out here on this planet, And so if that's true, then what Revelation is telling us is that out of wherever God is, he's going to bring down Jerusalem, like a new Jerusalem. It was a garden to begin with. Now it's a city. And it's every tribe, tongue, and nation is going to be in that city. And it's like, we're going to be here. So that's an essential thing that I think the escapism kind of doubles with some of the freak out of like, oh my gosh, things are going to get worse and worse. And we're just like escaping through fire when actually everything's going to be renovated and renewed.
And that even shapes how we view like the day of the Lord and judgment too. It's like, it's not just judgment for judgment's sake. It's like you said at the beginning, it's like we need to have judgment to prepare what God is preparing for us here. And even that lens is just different already. It's like, man, he's got to get rid of that to create the space for what he wants to do now.
Yeah. So already you're pointing out an incorrect view on how we should picture eternity. Like I float up into heaven and I'm done with earth.
Yeah.
And seeing
Well,
that.
think about that. Then Satan wins. Like here's earth, right? And Satan encroached. And so the presence of God now gets pulled out of that. And then the influence of Satan is to some degree is prevailing, right, on this earth. God moves back in and says, no, and kicks him out. If we're all going to heaven somewhere, it's kind of like, well, I guess you won, Satan. We're going to go over here, and you can't touch us here. Like it's not that. It's very much of a re-invasion. It'll be like, nah, I'm coming back, and we're going to do this right again. And so in that way, it's like heaven is when our lives start, because that was the beginning. And so it's like, let's get back to that.
Yeah, it's almost like a homecoming. I think it's 2 Thessalonians. It's like a lot of the references sometimes people look at for the rapture, and some people believe it's like the second coming of Jesus, but the language that they use is more, talks about us being caught up in the sky and meeting Christ. And the language they use is, I believe, for an emperor who's coming home, but going out to meet him and escort him in back home, though. And then the keyword's home. It's like, it's not an invading place. He's returning back to where he was before. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, John.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some good, solid, and deep theology behind this that we're putting in more common terms. But yeah, that the Perusia is like him as the emperor coming back and having his rightful place.
So I have some specific questions regarding Revelation, but is there anything else before we do that?
Oh, it'll
Any
all
other
come
big
up,
framework?
right?
Okay, all right. So let's just get into some of the questions.
There's no
regarding
rhyme or
Revelation.
reason to any of this.
So there's a lot of different interpretations, even of end times, meaning like when it actually starts happening. Tribulation, like it's here, it's happening. We're talking pre-trib, post-trib. What the heck do those words mean? Can we describe a little bit of what do those words mean, and what are they informing us of?
Great words if you're an accountant. If you're just kinda
Trigonometry.
like, you love baseball and you got like RBI and you're writing down all like people love keeping track of that stuff. And for our sakes here, I think we probably hit the three big ones. So you've got the people that are more premillennialists. You got the premillennialists, the postmillennialists, and the amillennialists. So those are like the big three views of like what happens at the end. There are idealists and preterists and historicists, and that's kind of extra to it. But basically, if we had to reduce it again, this is gonna be super simplistic.
That's okay.
I don't want anybody like emailing. You didn't get that.
I need simple, John. Explain it to me like I'm
We
5.
appreciate simple.
Explain it to me like I push on pull doors multiple times.
That's nice.
Let's just imagine there's a 30-something-year-old pastor that really wants to understand how this all works.
Tell it to me like all I know how to
Asking
cook
for
is
a friend.
protein
Yeah,
shakes,
asking
John.
for a friend,
Please.
yeah.
That reminds me of The Far Side, where it's like the school of the gifted, and like the front door it says pull, and he's like pushing it open, trying to push it open. Yeah. So, and again, I'm no expert on end times, eschatology, or anything like that. But basically, there are a series of symbols, there are a series of numbers, there are a series of images that are presented in Revelation that make people try to figure it out. And so from the beginning, John is writing a letter, and he's writing it to churches, and he says, this is the apocalypsis, and so in Greek, that means to draw back the curtain, or to like kind of give a clear view on something, what's going on. What we do, though, is we mix that word up with apocalypse.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so like the apocalypse of John is like, here, let's pull this. It's a very gentle image. Here's some cookies. Pull the curtain
I
back.
picture Walking Dead, like buildings
man.
are destroyed.
I'm like, you don't get my point. It's supposed to be gentle. It's supposed to be
apocalypse. You
like
you get
breeze is coming through. There's like the smell of mint julep. But yeah, it's like you're saying. You hear the apocalypse, and you're like some guy with a big AK going, "Gah!" and like destroying the place. Get to the chopper. Yeah, it's like that type of image, or like some guy with horns. He's like, "You will bow." Like those types of images. And because there are some of those images within the apocalypse of John. But again, it's meant to like pull back and kind of help us understand. So it's a letter. It's written to 7 churches, and it starts off showing that Christ is preeminent. Christ is like the King of heaven. Like there's no disputing this. He's been slain. He come back to life. Man, you can't beat that. And then he goes on to kind of illustrate, like, look, these are some of the things that you churches are going to have to deal with. Now, remember, John's on an island, Patmos, right? And Patmos, he's held under constraint. Like he's basically arrested, but he has to stay on this island in exile. And any kind of communication that's going to come in and out is going to be looked through. Like he doesn't have the privacy of his own mail. So he's going to hide a lot of these things. He's going to put them in code. He's going to say, now let the reader understand as he writes these things. So listen, I want people to hear this very clearly. John is not writing a code for you to decipher from some dude who does numerology in his basement. There is no Bible code. There's not some guy who's putting all of the ancient Hebrew and ancient Aramaic and Greek texts through a computer and saying, oh my gosh, there's a code, look. God isn't thinking through binary. John's very upfront with it. He's like, if you want to understand, read the Old Testament, read Ezekiel, read Jeremiah, read Daniel. I mean, if you want to understand the book of Revelation, read your Old Testament. Don't look forward, look back. And so to answer your question then,
Mhm.
so like how should we start looking at this? Or how should we read it? Read the Old Testament, understand where all these symbols are coming from, and then you start to understand some of these symbols may be about a future person, but some of these symbols might be about a person or might be about institutions, people that
Mhm.
continue in our lives like over
Mm.
and over again. So,
Yeah.
having said that, there are some people that read all of these anywhere between like Revelation 10 all the way up through like Revelation 20. Just a lot of stuff there. 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. There's a woman riding on a beast. She's drunk on the blood of the saints. I mean, there's just a lot of very stark imagery there. All right, so like before I even get into any of this is where everything goes from like knee deep to like neck deep, okay? Because this is where a lot of people live, and not everybody lives there. So I know some people are going to be watching this and be like, "What did I just get myself into?" Stick with us, like don't just click off of this because especially the stuff we talk about later, this is going to be so worth it. But there are some people out there that when they read through Revelation, remember Revelation starts off like a letter, kind of introduces Jesus as preeminent. It gets in that middle part where there's a lot of stuff that's really scary, and then at the end, it's like there's this wedding feast. In the kind of connection between the scary stuff and the wedding feast, there's a lot of talk about how Jesus, at some point, is going to come, and he mentions 1,000 years, what we call the millennium. So the millennium is the word for 1,000 years, but basically there's 1,000 years that's talked about in there. And as he talks about 1,000 years, it's like, well, then Jesus is going to come. He's going to rapture a bunch of people. And so he uses the word rapture. And people are like, what is rapture? So there's a bunch of different things there. There's rapture, there's second coming. But it's all based on this whole idea of 1,000 years. He's going to rapture people, and then he's going to reign for 1,000 years. Or some people understand it differently, that 1,000 years are going to happen, and then Jesus comes back, whatever. But there's this roadblock for a lot of people talking about 1,000 years. And so that's where people get hung up on the millennium. So sometimes when people get into this, and I don't want anybody to like click off of this because this is crucial to understanding, there are people that understand that millennium in a bunch of different ways. And so basically there's just 3 different ways to look at it. Easy. First one, there are some people that believe that millennium is literal. And basically it's like there are a literal 1,000 years. So, and within that, there are different grades and ideas and flavors of how we understand that. But basically, there's a literal 1,000 years where Jesus is going to come back. He's either going to reign for 1,000 years, or he's going to come back before the 1,000 years, or he's going to come back after the 1,000 years, whatever it is. And that's what that is. Okay. The second thing is post-millennial. So you got the pre-millennial, you got the post-millennial, and that is it's after the millennium. And so these people believe that 1,000 years is actually happening right now. And that there's this kind of symbolic sense of like, it's not literally 1,000 years because it's been over 2,000 years already, or up to 2,000 years already. And so it's a symbolic sense of like, oh, no. This is actually now, and things are going to get better and better and better, and missions are going to go out and reach the world, and people are going to know Jesus, and governments are going to change and get better, and it's going to get so great that Jesus will have to return and will, cap off the millennium. Okay, so that is Jesus will return post-millennium. The first one is Jesus will return pre-millennium, and then he's going to inaugurate 1,000 years. And then the last one is kind of simple. It's a millennium. And it's weird because it's not, you think a millennium, it's like, oh, there's no millennium. No, it actually means the millennium is now, but it's all symbolic. And that when Jesus rose from the dead, that began the millennium, the 1,000 years. And again, it's very symbolic for the amillennialists. It just kind of symbolizes how the course of time will run, the church will start to take off, and things will go great for a while, but then toward the end, it'll kind of like not go so great. And then Jesus is going to come back and he's going to set up his kingdom on earth, and, the judgment happens. So that's like the super simplistic,
Yeah.
because there's lots of flavors within each one of those. When someone talks about the millennium, I just wanted people to know, okay, so what is millennium? The millennium is this word that's found in Revelation that makes us think, okay, 1,000 years. So what do we do with 1,000 years? Some people believe it's totally literal. That's exactly 1,000 years, and Jesus is going to come back before it. There's some people that believe it's symbolic and that it's leading up to Jesus coming. And then there's some people that believe it's symbolic, but at the end of it, that's when Jesus comes up and just sets up everything and does the final judgment. And we're on a whole new, different new life, new heavens, new earth.
And so this is already showing, and this is just 3 views.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's very confusing.
How many, and it is very confusing to think through. There's so many different views. And the only thing that's clear is that it's not clear.
Yeah.
Is that you look at this and people are trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure it out, but how important is it that someone takes a stand on this? How important is it that someone says, I got to pick one? Like, I'm not one of those right now. Is that important for someone to say, I got to figure out if I'm pre or post, and not have that influence by whether or not they like Post Malone?
What do you think?
I think like there's probably an attentiveness that it's like you should probably like explore it enough to think I'd probably lean this way. Again, I don't think it should end up in your core if that's the verbiage you guys were using for that earlier. I think we should let it for sure inform the way we live here, though, right? And so, hey, if diving into this is going to help you establish a worldview and a context of, hey, this is what I believe, and that's informing how I live the rest of my life with a sense of urgency, with expanding the kingdom of God. And I'd say, hey, man, like knock yourself out, go for it. But if you're going to get in the weeds, like I got to figure that out before I get the rest of my life together and follow Jesus and like step into some of that urgency, that's kind of missing the point in my opinion.
Yeah. It's for me, it's like kombucha.
It misses the point.
Have you ever had
Misses the whole
I do not like
the mother
kombucha.
thing at the bottom kind of scares me.
Yeah.
That's probably in
Those
Revelation.
things
what-
float around in that
I don't
drink.
even know what it is. What is kombucha?
It has to do with bacteria that's been healthy. Like it's healthy bacteria.
It's
Someone
supposed to be
told me.
healthy.
I don't know.
People get into kombucha, don't they? I have a friend who's totally into kombucha, and he's like, "You got to try some of this." So I'm like, I don't know. It looks like something's dead in there.
I liked pulp-free orange juice.
Yeah.
So when there's anything floating around in
Yeah,
there,
it's
I'm like,
just a little
no, thank
like-
you.
See, I'm a
Mm.
pulp guy. I like pulp.
You
'cause
do
it's
like pulp?
like, wow, it's real. Yeah.
It feels like
Yeah.
you're literally drinking an orange.
If I have
Yeah.
to chew it, I'm out. Yeah.
So the reason I bring up kombucha is this: is kombucha. Some people get totally into kombucha, right? And they're like, "You got to have some," but they're not just satisfied with you trying the kombucha, even though it makes you like want to gag. They're like, "Here, let me give you recipes. Here, let me come by your house. I'll start you off with a starter set." And they're like at your house, like at 8 o'clock in the morning.
us
Going,
starter
"Here's
set.
here's
Is
the
there a
first
starter
jug."
set?
There is. Apparently there is. But they're like, dude,
Link in the show notes.
get on with it, you know? And they keep pushing you
Mm.
to like be your own kombucha merchant, you know?
Mhm.
Like I don't want to be the kombucha guy. You know, even if I liked kombucha, I would keep it quiet because I wouldn't want people like, oh, he's a kombucha. It's like patchouli, you know, like patchouli is the same thing. You know, those people that wear like the patchouli stuff, and it.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Do you know what? Do you know what patchouli is?
Like bejeweling, like bedazzling,
Oh,
like jeans?
bejeweling.
Patchoul.
Huh.
Not jewelry.
Bejeweling?
I thought you were like
Jewels on your tux?
Yeah, like
No.
some jeans, bro.
No. Patchouli's like this stuff. It's like an essence. It's like nard. You know, it's like a very. You know it to smell it. Okay. It smells like smells like someone took a log and like ground it down after it rotted and like sit in the basement for a couple months.
Mm.
And then you smell it. It just smells like fresh earth and decomposing things. And some people love this smell.
Okay.
And so they'll wear patchouli and they're like, dude, you got to wear this because it's got health benefits.
A man
and
in the woods.
I'm serious. Now, obviously, people are going to watch it like, oh, he just insulted me. I wear patchouli. But it's kind of a little bit more of like a granola, sometimes hippie type of thing, which is cool if you want to wear it. I'm totally fine if you want to wear it. I don't even mind smelling it. Like, it smells kind of sort of nice.
You couldn't hold your face together on that one.
So, but the point is, there are some people that are like, you gotta have this. You gotta have this in your life.
Yeah.
You've got to be the kombucha guy. You got to be the patchouli person. And if you're not the kombucha or patchouli person, then you're not living the right way.
Mhm.
And you feel that kind of like, oh, okay, well, every time I'm around this person, they're gonna think I'm less than because I'm not a patchouli or a kombucha person. And so I think sometimes people are like that when it comes to Revelation, where it's like, well, I have the right way on this. And they keep trying to work it into conversation. They keep trying to push it on people. They open up YouTube channels. They have shortwave radio, you know, that they're like trying to get it out to everybody.
Yeah.
You know, they're the people who are like, I'm not going to take this because it's the chip and you're going to make me into one of you. So it's cool if you have those convictions, but when you try to force it on other people, and I think that's where you're getting is, there's a certain amount of this becomes kind of a hobby. I don't know. Is that too low of a bar to put? Like, if you want to study Revelation and get your own idea on it, that's cool.
Mhm.
But don't let it rise
Yeah.
above a hobby.
And I think there's
Yeah.
just a level of humility to approach
Mhm.
text like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because you can, again, you can build up this arrogance of
Yeah.
studying something that you know. There's a lot of ways to look at this, and a
Mhm.
lot of very compelling ways to look at this. And so, like you said, Josh, it's like coming to enough of an understanding.
Yeah.
It's like I can feel like I'm being honest in my study of Scripture,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
but getting to a point where I say, but at this point, I'm kind of hitting this lid where
Mhm.
I can't know all of this for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm to pretend that I do, it's not gonna help someone.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think when I'm learning something, if the end is to be right
Yeah.
and to know something someone doesn't, I'm not gonna win anyone over for
Okay,
Jesus.
so that for me is the defining factor. Do you
Mm.
want to be right or do you want to be ready?
Mm.
And so those are the two delineating factors in my mind. So many people get much more satisfaction about being right than thinking about how can I be
Mhm.
ready.
So
And so the question for you guys, I think, is so Jesus talks about over and over being ready. Be ready, be aware. You know it's going to happen. It comes like a thief in the night. When the servant, if the servant knew what time his master was coming back, what do you want to be ready, right? In John chapter 14, when the bridesmaids are waiting, they're ready. So there's all this emphasis on being ready. There's hardly ever any evidence on being right.
Mm.
No one knows the day or
Yeah.
the hour. There's no specific thing or time or whatever, but there is plenty of emphasis on being ready. So the question is, what does it look like to be ready?
Mm.
Because some people are like, ready? Okay, I'm going to dig out a bomb shelter in my backyard.
Yeah.
I'm going to wear a hat. I'm going to have a shotgun. Like, that's not ready.
Yeah.
Ready has nothing to do with trying to ward off anything because Jesus comes back and he doesn't bring with him like an Uzi, you know?
Mhm.
He brings with him his word.
Mm.
And that's the thing that, and the only blood is his own blood. You know, like he died to win. He's conquering by sacrifice and surrender. So like you get it wrong if you're wearing the pith helmet and you're like, here we go.
Mm.
Being ready means that you try to, as much as possible, get as many people into the lifeboat as possible. You know, like we know that at some point Jesus is returning. And so there's going to be a judgment. And people who are under judgment are going to be judged and found not in the new kingdom, the new heavens and the new earth. So like, how do we affect that? How do we be ready with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's huge. That part of it of is what I'm learning, what I'm studying gonna be useful and helpful for someone else.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And sometimes knowing some parts of end times can even be a comfort
Yeah.
to realize maybe it's not all
Yep.
apocalypse
Yeah.
that we think it is, and realizing, oh wow, some of this is beautiful.
Mhm.
And so to your point, Josh, like studying some of this and knowing enough can
Yeah.
actually be useful to someone else.
Yep.
Mhm.
When they're asking
Yeah.
questions, they're coming in, you can receive them not with, hey, I gotta be right
Yep.
and I want to force you into a view, but hey, here's a few ways that this might actually encourage you.
Yeah. Yeah. Let it be a supplement, not a substitute.
Yeah.
How you live. Let it like assist it, but not become the thing.
What about another topic is mark of the beast.
Mm.
And so this comes up a lot is what is
Yeah.
that thing? You mentioned the chip in your your comment earlier is what is the mark of the beast? What are the views on this? How should we understand that part of Revelation?
I think the biggest thing, you already touched on it, John, it's not something any of us are going to stumble our way into and not conscientiously be aware of. And so, like, if you're already like, they told me not to be afraid, but like, how do I make sure I don't get the mark of the beast?
Mhm.
Like, you're okay.
Some
Like,
people thought the COVID shot was the mark of
Yeah.
the beast.
yeah,
And it's like, you can't get it accidentally.
yep. Yeah, this would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, I think it's Revelation 7 talks about like the seal of God on the tribes. And I think Revelation 13 brings the mark of the beast in. But it should indicate either way. Like,
Oh, okay. You like the lamb.
This is
has
like
the
allegiance.
seal.
Yeah, this is allegiance. You're saying, hey, I'm allegiant to. And if you're looking at Revelation, it's like, hey, a lot of the symbolism is like, are you going to have allegiance to God in the midst of persecution and suffering, or allegiance to the empire? And I mean, yeah, you can't stumble your way into allegiance, right? It's got to be a very conscientious decision.
Yeah, it's funny because it talks about the hand, right, and the forehead.
Yep.
And some people think that John saw like barcodes, you know, that somehow you're going to get a chip in your hand or a chip in your forehead. And now there's voice or there's facial recognition software. And some guy apparently had a barcode put in his hand so he could like buy stuff with the barcode. And so, you know, that very well maybe John did see that and he's reporting that. We've got to subject our view of Revelation to looking back, not forward. You know, it's not so much what did John see in the future. It's more like what is John telling us from the Old Testament. And so, again, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, even Isaiah, Psalms, he's bringing all of these things and showcasing them and saying, let the reader understand. And he's actually calling us to think through that lens of the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, a person would wear on their wrist or on their forehead little boxes of scripture. And so that showed my allegiance. Like, this is who I'm this is what I'm worshiping. This is who I have this direct allegiance to. So that was probably more the image he was referring to. I could be wrong. I mean, it could be barcodes, it could be whatever, but it probably seems more likely that the people in his day would have been like, oh, okay, so they've got an allegiance, but it's to the beast. And so it's kind of like, oh, okay, I get it. So they're not wearing these little boxes of scripture. They're wearing little boxes that show allegiance to Satan. And so that's where it's like, oh, okay, well, these are people that are bought out, worshiping demons, Satan, the whole complex of military and commercial industries and everything that was Babylon and Rome. Like they're bought into that. They love that. So that's where I would see what that means.
And if you view the book as two competing kingdoms, it's like, oh, that makes sense, right? Like if this is really a book about Jesus' kingdom expanding and overlapping heaven and earth again, then like to have two competing allegiances,
right,
and a way to signify that,
because believers have their own seal, and so it's like these two different
competing
versions of it. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
but you do get into like, so what is the beast?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then what is the mark of the? Well, we already talked about the mark of the beast, but what's the number of the beast? Right? We're going to get into that because that's
go for it.
Everybody.
Yep.
Everybody's like,
what is the number of the beast?
666.
Yeah,
dude, that was big time growing up because I remember there were like, I don't know why, but late 70s, early 80s, like some of these bands got real big into that, like Judas Priest and I can't remember like what were some of them, but Megadeth.
It became a very hardcore symbol.
Ronnie James Dio, he's got the horns,
Yeah.
and people were wearing horns, and
It would put chill in your bones. Like that's people leaned into that imagery. It
Yeah.
became a very like demonic, evil, just some kind of hardcore symbol people would use for.
Yeah. So I got a great story for this. Again, can I share the story? This is good.
I don't know what it is, but go for it.
So I went to Gordon Conwell Seminary. I got my master's up in Boston, and it was during Halloween, and a bunch of us were just bored, because like we've been reading our eyeballs out, we're studying stuff. We're studying Hebrew and Greek and all this stuff. So we'd heard that in Danvers, or was it? Yeah, it was in Danvers. Danvers, there was this yearly thing at Halloween where people flood into Danvers and Salem. I think it was the neighboring community of Salem, where they actually no, it was the town of Salem, where there was a witch that was related to the witches of Salem from of old. So everybody goes there, and it's supposed to be demonic and stuff like that. And I remember saying to my roommate, I'm like, dude, let's go and share Jesus with people. And he's just like, no, this is a bad plan. He's like, I'm not doing this. I'm like, come on, man, we got to do this. We're bored. It was like Friday night, Saturday, and whatever. I'm like, there's going to be tons of people there. Let's just share Jesus with people. Because we'd heard that like witches and warlocks, and they all come out there. And so I don't know. Does it sound exciting to you?
It does sound exciting to me.
Yeah.
Well, only because I actually went to Salem in college.
Oh, okay, yeah.
During a Halloween.
Yeah, do you know what I'm talking about?
So I know exactly what you're talking about. I think I know where you're going to go with it.
It's like the famous witch. What's her name?
I don't remember the name of the witch, but I do remember going over Halloween and like a bus trip.
Yeah.
We went to Boston, and then we took a train into Salem.
Yeah.
And we were like, Halloween in Salem.
It was like flooded
creepy.
with people, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was jam-packed with the best Halloween costumes you can imagine. It was like a big Comic-Con.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And like
totally.
You just walk through and everyone's just like in these cool outfits. And it was actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
You're just walking up and down the streets just looking at
and there's
people.
there's like a courtyard or like a park that's in that area. So I just like roamed through the courtyard, and I would go up to people and be like, hey, so I know this is like a big festival going on here and everything, but and Mark Zeislav, he came with me, and he's like, why?
His head's down the whole time.
He's like, why am I
Looking
here?
at his shoes.
Did you dress up?
No. Mark and I'm like, this is my friend Mark and I. He's like, hi. I'm like, we're actually seminary students over at the seminary, and we'd love to talk to people about Jesus, And so most people just blew us off. They're like, no, So this one guy, this is so great. This one guy, he's wearing like a pentacle, and he's got teeth in that are like super long, and he's like, he's doing this thing.
Yeah.
So, and I think he had like dark hair, like he made his hair black and all this stuff. And he's got this long trench coat. So he's walking.
Is he Dracula?
Basically.
Okay.
So they're walking through the park, and there's a couple of them. I'm like, hey, my name's Sean. This is Mark. And then, so I said, we'd like to talk to you about Jesus. He goes, yeah, you can talk to me about Jesus. And he's got this like deep, deep voice.
Christian Bale,
And I'm
Batman
like,
voice.
and it's funny because, I'm Batman. But yeah, so he starts sharing his, and he's totally trying to intimidate me.
Right.
And I'm trying to share Jesus, and at the same time, there's like the human part of me, and I just want to like punch him in the face. I'm like, you don't intimidate me. Yeah. So I'm listening to him, talking to him, and he interrupts me, and he goes, "Don't you realize I'm a warlock?" And I was like, "Yeah, I saw you got the teeth in there. Are they fake teeth, or did you do something?" And he goes, "No, you don't understand. I'm wearing the pentagram. I worship Satan." I'm like, "Whoa, hold up, Jack. That's not a pentagram." And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "That's a pentacle. That's more Saxon. You're talking about pentagram, Anton LaVey. That's more like 1960s. He co-opted those symbols from like early Saxon and kind of Jude, some of the pagan religion. That's more about earth worship. What you're talking about is the more modern kind of syncretistic view of taking some of these early pagan rituals and combining them with hedonism, essentially. So, I mean, you're really not a warlock."
Got
His
him.
brain just
And he goes,
Destroyed.
existential crisis.
he looks at me and he goes, and he changed the voice. He goes, "Hey, listen, dude, I'm a computer programmer from Danvers. I'm just out here because the witches are hot." He just said, "I'm out here
I
because
didn't
the
sign up
witches
for
are
this.
hot." That's all he wanted, And so I was like, "All right, now we can talk."
Yeah,
there you go.
And he's like, yeah, all this is just whatever. I'm like, "So you're having fun?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Hey, listen, what do you believe?" And so like he shared with me what he believed, and I shared with him what I believe. I walked him through like what it means to trust Jesus. He wasn't interested, but that was my night. And so I share this story with you because there are a lot of people who, when you hear that 666, they're like, "Oh, that's all Satan. That's all like," and they have all these ideas in mind about witchcraft. When they're very different areas, like witches and witchcraft, as we understand it, is more pagan, and pagan, the word comes from pagos, which means like the hills. It was the worship of on the hills. They would go to the hilltop and they would worship fertility symbols and things like that, and they were much more earth-centered. Satanism, as we understand it today, is very different than like the Satanism that anybody would have understood in the first century. So there's just all kinds of brands of stuff that are going on that we really shouldn't get freaked out about. So when you see 666, if some idiot, if a person with not a lot of discretion is wearing a T-shirt that's like, "I worship Satan 666," they're probably just misguided and kind of wanting a reaction. Let's just say.
So you're saying we think about Mark of the Beast, we think of the number 666. If we see that,
Don't get freaked out.
we bought something at Target and it
Yeah.
equals 666.
don't-
Should I add something, or do I pay it? Do I take the receipt with me?
Do I steal it?
Do I burn the receipt? I mean, like people have a very visceral
Yeah.
reaction to 666.
Yeah.
I saw someone with a license plate once.
Right.
It had 666. And I did have this knee-jerk reaction of like, why didn't you just change that? Why deal with that
And,
for the rest of your life?
To be honest with you, same with me. Like if someone's like, "Here's your locker, it's 666," I'm like, no,
Thank you.
Like I don't want that one. But in all reality, though, the 666 is John even says this. He's like, "Let the reader understand," and he uses something called gematria, which was like back then it was a study of letters and numbers. And so both in Greek and in Hebrew, you could assign letters with certain values. And so when you add up to come out with 666, you're adding up Nero's name. And Nero was
Dude, he was a monster.
tell about,
because we were talking about Nero a little bit earlier. So like, dude, first of all, you guys have heard like when Rome was on fire. Like there's speculation that he actually did that, regardless of whether he did or not. He blamed the Christians, and so like class warfare or
he
being
hated the
persecuted.
Christians.
But like now they're the reason a ton of people died.
Right.
Not great. Obviously persecuted them a ton, and so like they're being crucified, they're being thrown in the Colosseum. He used to have like gardens, and he would take his people through the gardens, and like Christians would be the torches, right?
Alive.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like just a sick dude.
Yeah.
Murdered his mom, murdered his wife, murdered his other pregnant wife. And then eventually he's like mob bossing his way through everything. And like that can only last so long, right? Because he's like paranoid and crazy. So military turns against him. Senate turns against him. Even his like own bodyguard turns against him. And he ends up alone on his own. Apparently even I heard too, he was quoting, like pacing back and forth, getting ready to kill himself, and said, "What an artist dies in me." Like he just was so misguided. He thought he was like this god, this artistic person, ended up killing himself. And like
Today he'd be like a recording artist, basically.
he would have been like, I don't know Roman history enough to say, but I would assume maybe the most infamous emperor that they had.
Yeah.
And so like even for John to point to him as kind of being associated with the empire, it's almost like what we would do for Hitler with fascism.
Yeah.
People throw the term Hitler around,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
oh, stop being
Right.
Hitler.
Right.
But like saying, hey, like even if this is symbolic, because he would have been dead by the time he wrote
Yeah.
this, like there's just so much meaning as far as what he embodied, and as far as even John talking about, all right, symbolically, this is what the empire stands for, this is what God's kingdom stands for. Like he's the full embodiment of what.
And so
the
when you
empire
add
would
up
be.
his name, the Nun, the Resh, the Vav, the Nun, and then Kaiser, which would be Kof, Samek, Resh, when you add all those things up, all those had specific values. And they were, everybody would have understood what these values were. Like I think the Nun is 50, the Vav is 6. I think the Resh is like 200. But when you add all those things up, it comes up to 666. And John himself says, let the reader, doesn't he say like, let the reader understand, or like, if you have understanding, look at this. And so it's that code again. And some people think that maybe he was coding it because his mail was red. And so sending out this mail, they wouldn't have understood that. They would have just been, guards, and they're not going to be really paying attention. But if they saw Nero, they might be like, hey, what are you doing? But like you said, Nero was even dead.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even so much Nero, it was what Nero embodied.
Right.
So when we talk about the beast and the number of the beast, and so he's talking about the beast, it's not so much that Nero was the beast, although there was
Did you hear about the rumor? Like
the rumor that he was going to come
he's
back to
gonna
life.
come back.
Yeah.
He was like almost so infamous. They're like, he's either gonna come back or
He's
like
Tupac.
he didn't. He's Tupac. He didn't die. It's Michael Jackson. He's
They
out
brought
there.
him back in projector form.
We got him
Yeah,
on
sure.
TikTok. He's here.
Yeah.
But like, there's this idea that he was potentially gonna come back and get back into power, I guess.
Yep. So the idea then is that the number of the beast, the mark of the beast, all the beast is everything that encompasses this cult of personality that's evil, that seeks to kill Christians and perpetuate a system that's evil.
And so I'm also thinking about how numbers represent things.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible uses like 7 for the good, 3 for perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also heard that interpretation of 6 being like imperfect,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's 3 6s, so it's like perfectly imperfect.
Mm.
And so it's also like these interesting interpretations to
interesting,
say,
yeah.
hey, maybe that's all it's really saying. We're almost saying the same thing, where it's
Mhm.
the embodiment of the 2 kingdoms.
No, I'm right.
Divided. And
Let
it be known.
But I believe.
yeah.
And you got to take
That's a
some
great
kombucha.
idea, Andrew. But
You
like,
got a joke of kombucha
yeah,
right here.
please. But we're gonna. Could you all cut that one out?
Yeah.
So we got Mark of the Beast, 666, all that's helpful. I love to also talk about Final Judgment. Like you get to a point where this one can feel real heavy too, because we don't like the word judgment already.
Mm-hmm.
I think we don't always go to like, oh, like something just is happening, something good. We think loss, we think like weight, we kind of fearful. Like, oh, I don't want to stand before judgment throne. And so what is the final judgment? How does the Bible talk about the final judgment?
The
What's gonna
the only person I know who likes judgment is Angela from The Office. Didn't she say like I like?
I'm
She
sure
loves
she
judging
does.
people.
She's like I like it when I get judged.
She loves
She was in
people.
Junior Miss or something like that. She's like I love being in Junior Miss when people would judge me. Which kind of helps make sense of like that she was rather
The kind of person that likes
judgy
judging
as well. Yeah. But I think you're right though. How do we get comfort out of judgment?
Yeah.
But again, imagine America as a place where you are routinely oppressed and you live on the margins of society because of your faith. And there's someone who reveals to you like, hey, you know what? There's going to be a time in which God judges these systems. This oppression is going to be brought into justice. So there's that perspective. Part of you would be like, okay, I can do this. Like I can move on. I know that this will all be worth it someday. I think that's part of it. It's so hard. And I wonder in some ways, like it talks about God blessing America, and God has blessed America greatly. But in some ways it's a curse if we're blessed too much because we live like gods in some way, that it's like, man, we got everything at our disposal. In some ways it might be better if we understood, or at least had an appreciation for persecution. And maybe that is why Jesus tells us to associate with the poor, and not just associate, but help and work with and come alongside of the poor and people who are marginalized, so that we have within us this sense of like, yeah, there needs to be justice. We need to bring justice about here, and not just for us, but for people that are oppressed.
Yeah. Here, I have a story now. So this helped me make sense of some of this, I feel like, and it's a probation story. I'm gonna tell you a probation story.
Oh
today.
yeah, well tell them why it's a probation, because you used to be a
I used to
probation
be a
officer.
probation.
Yeah.
I was not on probation. But
Were
I
you
was-
the guy
I was-
that like brought people to justice, showed up at their door, and be like, "Come on, let's go."
Sometimes that's like some of the story, but
That
like,
is
dude, this
awesome.
is I haven't told this a ton. This is probably like even top 5 like formative moments of my life. Like there's a moment with this, I was like, oh, like this makes a ton of sense of just how I see life and even justice in general. And so when someone's on probation or parole, it's like it's kind of up to them. It can either be a safety net if they want to do right by themselves and by society, or it can be like a ton of accountability and somebody kind of looking over your shoulder. And so we had these 2 people who were on probation with us. One was a girl who was on with me, and then one was a guy who was like MIA. We couldn't find him. He had a warrant out, and he was on with my supervisor. And dude, I'll never forget the day. Girl was doing good, doing what she should have been doing, kind of associating with the wrong crowd, and came into my office. And dude, I remember the look in her eye. She said, "Hey, like I was in the wrong place, wrong time, and was sexually taken advantage of." And she's like, "Hey, the police are kind of doing what they need to do, but they're like trying to get the evidence. They can't really do anything right now. I think I know where this guy is, and like you guys don't have to play by those rules quite yet, because when people are on supervision with you, you can do a ton of different stuff." And it was almost for her like a cry to help, like, all right, this guy's like harassing me now. Like I've had this horrible thing happen. He's kind of holding it over me. And dude, I remember her leaving. And you ever like, God's nudging you to do something. I just felt like he was like, hey, like make this your problem. Like make this your problem.
That's awesome.
And so like got out of the office. went
You
to my
heard that?
supervisor.
Like you
Yeah, just
felt
like you
make
said, and
this
it
your
like, well, I
problem?
mean, it's also not hard when you see someone in that much pain who's
Yeah.
gone through something.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, it would have had to be like, could have been like, my supervisor will figure it out. I was like, oh no, if we know where he's at, we got to go.
That's your ministry. You know what I mean? Like in that moment,
Yeah.
you were a pastor. You were ministering to her. That's
Yeah.
so awesome.
And so like went to the supervisor, like, hey, I think we know where he is. Here's the day I want to go. Here's what I want to take. And like, let's go get this guy. And she was like, yeah, go. And so dude, we went to that house. We kicked in those doors.
Oh,
We got our
so
dude.
awesome.
I remember though, there was one door I kicked, it didn't open. And the guy just like, there's some random guy like, hey, like, sorry.
Wait, so you're saying like the door, you were like,
I tried like a
Darn
couple
it.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then eventually he's like, hey, and we're like, hey.
Might just let us in.
But we get in there, we find our guy, we take him away, and we get some of the evidence the police needs. And like I remember looking her eye, right? And so like my partner throws him in the backseat, he's going to jail. And I remember like, I'm gonna look in the rearview mirror, I want to catch his eyes. I want to see the look in his eyes now. And I do that, and I thought I'd see like remorse. It almost just like looked like sunken defeat. Just like, oh man, they caught me. But not really a full sense of like, I've come to my own, the end of myself and depravity and my sin. And it was
like
almost
he's
just
still
like,
scheming. He's still like,
yeah,
how can I get
there's
out
almost
of
still that little hint of like rebellion.
Interesting.
And I think for some people, like even this judgment will be kind of still that posture for them. Where it's like, hey man, if we can come to the end of ourselves and like, man, I need a savior. Like
Yeah.
I've done evil, I've done wrong. Jesus
Yeah.
went to the cross for me. But for some people, I think they're still gonna be like, my allegiance is to the empire. My allegiance is
Yeah.
to my kingdom,
Yeah.
Jesus. And so you got me, you're God, but I may not actually come to the grips
Oh,
with the fact that
wow.
like I'm
Yeah.
evil, right? And like I like how C.S. Lewis talks about it in The Great Divorce. And I think even why that moment was so formative for me was just like, oh, this is what he's talking about. Because there are two kinds of people in the end: those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done. All who are in hell choose it. And so this idea of like, man, where's your allegiance lie? And you know, if we live in a way where like John's talking about here, where it's like, man, we have a mission, we have an urgency. Jesus is coming back, he's not done yet. And we can point people to having a relationship with him and finding salvation through him. And we want to get as many as we can.
Yeah.
But for some people, man, no matter what we do, it still won't be enough for them to say, hey, my allegiance is
Yeah,
to
it does
Jesus.
say that every knee will bow and every tongue confess, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like, yeah, I believe this.
Yeah,
Well, like, yeah, I'll agree with that.
Mm.
I don't want it.
yeah,
Yeah, and those moments in our life that we can start paralleling with
Yeah.
Scripture, with who God is,
hmm
can also give us an even more, a better emotional connection with God too. To see
Yeah.
like, oh wow, I'm seeing this played out in a different way. And
Yeah.
it's almost like you have your own imagery that you can picture in the same way that writers of the Bible would pull together some kind of imagery to really make it like this is really how harsh or how evil. eh, This is how important judgment is, and because there's real evil,
Mhm.
and it is not who God is good,
Mhm.
and there is evil that God needs to deal with.
Well, and again, like if you remember big picture, if we just think of the book of Revelation as one, if you can put it into, and again, my summary is going to be very incomplete, very simplistic, and I'm not a Revelation expert by any means. But if I think about it, it starts off and it's like Jesus is Lord because of dying and rising again. He suffered and was the victor. He conquered through surrender. This is for 7 churches. Don't give in.
Mm.
Stay strong. Rome is tough. Stay strong in your faith. And then it goes on to talk about all of the things in that middle portion. There's 7 bowls, there's 7 trumpets, there's 7 seals. All of these things are pronounced, but they're all recapitulations of each other. They're almost like nests in nests and nests. So it's not like this is going to happen and then this is going to happen
Yeah,
and
like
this is going to happen.
linear,
It's
yeah.
like 7 things. Let's go back. 7 things. Let's go back again. Let's give it from different perspectives. But it's all about injustice. It's all about oppression. It's all about how there's this military, commercial, political construct that's overwhelming and oppressive and squashes people. And that is what you are suffering from.
Mm.
Oh, it's like that middle passage. Hey, they can kill you, but that's all they can do. And you have a life beyond this. So actually by being killed, you win. So there's great hope in that. It's almost like forget all the pestilence, the pale rider on the horse, the blood, all that stuff. It's like a backdrop of saying you rise above it. And so that's where the hope is that the worst they can do is kill you. The worst they can do is kill you. That's the whole central part of the middle part of Revelation. And then God comes in the picture and says, I appreciate that you're living this way, that all they can do is kill you, but I am going to step back in because I made this perfect to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
When I made it perfect, it's like imagine a masterpiece. Imagine, a painting that's beautiful and someone comes by and slashes it with, like a cutting knife and spray paints it. God is going and saying, look, that's not going to happen again. And I'm going to sit as a judge, make sure that never happens again. And I'm going to restore the entire thing. And that's what 19, 20, and 21 is. That great battle leads to the great feast. And so the whole thing is about a wedding. It ends at a wedding. It ends at like God is now face to face with his people. There's a voice from behind the throne that says the dwelling place of God is among his people. That's where it ends. So that's why, like, when I talked to Matt about that, he was like, I never heard any of that. All I heard was like, we better be careful because we're going to get the blood, smashed out of us. It's like, no. That is against all the oppressive regime, that we find ourselves in. Have hope because you live above it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. There's a lot in Revelation that my wheels are turning, and so what we've covered is one, Revelation is hard. It's hard to fully understand because there's a lot happening. There's stuff in there that's imagery. It could have been some form of code from John. It could some of it is foretelling what's coming, but there's also so many different views on specifically what that means. And so, what we need to take out of that for one is there's going to be a level we get to where it's helpful to kind of be aware of what's going on, but we might not get much more than that. We're probably not going to have all the answers, and we don't want to get to a point where it's just about being right and just about having all the knowledge. We want to get to a point where we can help other people, and where that knowledge becomes a comfort for us, and seeing that Revelation's there as a gift for us, not as something to torture us with or scare us with.
Yeah, it's not a horror story. It's hope.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the mark of the beast in 666 isn't there to say, here's something that has power over you. And so every time you see that number, you better be fearful. You think about the beast, it's saying, no, as followers of Jesus, right? Like, first of all, no number just has power over you like that.
Right.
That's not even what it was intended to do in Revelation. But we sometimes can see a number anywhere out on a license plate or on a receipt, and we can start thinking like, oh man, like, am I in trouble? And that's not what it's meant for at all.
No, it's totally like pointing to a massive, like it was a person. It was pointing to Nero, but Nero represented like it was an image of something so much bigger. It's just the whole presence of evil itself. But the number itself was a code, for that.
So you're free from those numbers, those symbols that.
But I totally get it, though. I mean, don't you?
Yeah.
I'm still gonna,
Still a little.
I'm still, you know what I mean? Like if here's your locker, number 666, I'd be like, next. I don't know why. I just will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's always some cultural
Yeah, I just-
instinct
I
in
don't
us
like it.
that like we don't like seeing that number. We don't
It's
want
like
that number.
the 13th floor. They'll do that with elevators.
they won't
Don't-
do it.
They remove the
I
13th
never
floor.
Yeah.
noticed that, but like in certain buildings, it goes from 12th to 14th
It just
floor.
skips it. They
Yeah.
don't want to deal with it, even though technically
Technically,
I know.
you're the
Still the
14th is the
13th
13th.
floor.
14th
so
is the
now you know.
13th floor.
But that's the big thing is fear. We don't need to have fear, but we don't need to be right. We need to be ready, and I think that does change how we approach Revelation, and it actually impacts what we do with our lives.
Yeah.
We're not stuck in just trying to put the puzzles together. We're actually saying, how does this impact how I live, and what is this going to change in me? And
But
so
it's more fun to be right. And that's what we, you know what I mean? Honestly.
it's fun
Yeah.
to be right.
It's
Yeah.
like, okay,
More
we're going to
glory.
have our little thing. We're going to get our convention together. What do you think about? What do you think about? And everybody's like, no, I'm right. And you kind of develop like
Right.
hierarchies of who knows more.
Right.
And isn't that just like Pharisaism? You know,
Mhm.
isn't
Yeah.
that a form of legalism? It's okay if a bunch of people are getting together in a room, almost like a fantasy draft.
Hmm.
You know, when people get like, who are you going to get? How are you going to?
Mhm.
And you can compare things. My team's better than yours. No, there's no way he's going to do that. And you watch it play out.
It's a great
Like,
example.
I totally think that's fine.
Yeah.
And in fact, it might be kind of fun. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can be doing that are worse, right? But if you're a bunch of ladies, a bunch of guys want to get together, I don't know how many ladies really feel good about fantasy draft, but like guys, I think we can resonate with that idea of like, so what's your opinion? Let's read through Revelation and come up with our own ideas.
And the guy who has no idea what he's doing and picks random people for the draft
Oh yeah.
and then wins.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I
Just
spent my
crushes it.
whole life studying for this moment,
Yes.
and you were right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
that could happen.
Right. So, you know, that's the post-millennialist.
There it is. There it is.
But I mean, if you get into it and like, I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm going to barricade myself in a house. You know, Jason Keener, he's on staff here, and he brought this up one point where someone was like, I think we're living in the end times. And he was just like, really? He's like, yeah, I do. He's like, okay, so what are you going to do about it? And he's like, well, I'm going to like, and essentially what he's saying is he's going to pull back from society.
Mm.
He's
Yeah.
going to live all by himself. He's going to barricade himself. He's
Mm.
going to protect himself. And he was like, why?
Mhm.
Like, what is that accomplishing?
Mhm.
If you knew this is the end times, you wouldn't live differently in that you would pull back. You would live differently, like saying, guys, it's coming.
Yeah.
Guys, listen. You want to hear about this. You want to knock on doors. Like, you would accelerate your presence within our culture of trying to reach people for Jesus. You wouldn't pull back.
Mhm.
And you wouldn't put on like the tinfoil hat and make yourself like, I'm going to live up the road apart from everybody else.
Mm.
That's the absolute wrong way to live. It's
Mhm.
engage, be in, like teach and volunteer and be the person that's coaching the soccer team so that you can be out with the
Mhm.
people. That's where the people are, so that you can be like, hey, have you heard of Jesus? You know, and sure, you might get shunned, people will not talk
Mhm.
to you, whatever, but at least you're engaging. You're not pulling back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's going to be a final judgment. There will be an end.
Mhm.
And that moment will come where, hey, what did we do with Jesus? Did
Yeah.
we decide to
Yeah.
follow Jesus and choosing to follow and trust in Jesus? That's it, man. You're in that book of life.
Mhm.
Like, you're good. You can celebrate that day, the wedding day, like you said, John. And
Mhm.
there's going to be stuff in between that we can't fully know. We're told we just can't know the day. We can't know the time. But we can know enough to just be helpful and understand some of this picture. So as we're wrapping this up, the question really is, are we living in the end times? And so are there any final thoughts on this? Is there a different way you would maybe answer that question from the beginning to direct us, are we living in the end
I
times?
told you, man, it's Chick-fil-A. As long as Chick-fil-A's around, we're good. No,
Yes.
what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like, and again, like it's like, what do we know with this, right? I'd say that question's not as important as unless if what you will believe will cause you to live differently,
Mm.
right? And so if you're like, hey,
That's good.
like that urgency for me is not going to make me shrink back. It's going to make me lean out. It's like, man,
Oh.
in some ways, it's like adopt that view, like lean into that urgency. I like how guys from Bible Project talked about. They said like a lot of the symbolism here was really to compel us not to love our life so much that we shrink back from the idea of death. Like we live without anything left on the table, right? And like we see that with Jesus. Like if we're talking about kingdoms expanding, Jesus operated off of the same metrics. Hey, if you love your life, you're going to lose it. And so regardless of whether we're in the end times or not, man, life is too short. It's a mist. James calls it a mist. right? It's too short to live out of fear, to live being afraid of death, and to leave stuff on the table when people are going to spend eternity somewhere.
Mhm.
And Jesus is coming back, and we want as many people as we can at that wedding.
I would answer it with kind of a twist in a sense. In some translations, the way that Jesus is portrayed is talking about the end times. He's like, it's not for you to know the times and seasons or the dates and seasons. And he uses two words, or it's attributed him to using two words of chronos and kairos. And chronos is like minute, hour, like time. And then kairos is like season or like general area, that the time of God's will, I feel like this is what I need to do in this time. And so there is biblically, at least, a kind of a separation of like, we're not going to know the chronos. We're not going to know the actual minute, time, date. But there are certain things that help us to appreciate the season that we're in. And there are a few things that are really, really interesting in the New Testament where Jesus talks about, like, when you see the fig tree and leaf, you know that Christ is at the very gates. I mean, the New Testament talks about that. And the fig tree was a symbol of Israel. And if you think, like, Israel wasn't a nation for how many hundreds of years? I mean, from the time of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and Israel kind of ceased to be. And then in 1948 is when it was official, like Israel is now a nation again. So according to that, then you could look at that and say, this is the season in which Christ could be at the very gates. So I think a person could be like, okay, well, maybe we need to appreciate that. And I'm fine with that. Again, that's almost like, you're putting some of your facts together and be like, this could be. But again, that's a far way off from saying it's going to be on this date and this time, and like Harold Camping and some of these other Charles Taze Russell, and these people that said October 22nd, 1844, it's going to happen. However, I do feel like when the Bible talks about end times as a whole, to answer your question, Hebrews 1, is it Acts 2 talks about how we are in the end times. The end times were inaugurated with the death and resurrection of Jesus. So, like, this is it. We are in that area. And so everything we do now becomes urgent, but not manic. It's not just like,
Very different. Yeah.
we're all crazy. But urgency doesn't mean that you're anxious. Urgency can be like, no, that means we're not playing with this thing over here. Like this devil music, where they're playing around with images and stuff like that. We're not playing around with that. Like that's not me. And so, because I want to remain awake, I want to remain alert. I want to look and see, when is Jesus returning? And part of that isn't sitting at a window waiting for him to come through the sky. Part of that is being his emissary and saying, like, hey, let me tell you about Jesus, and let me illustrate it by my life. It's you're the person that leads up that team at work. I mean, that, like, you do it honestly, sincerely, with great detail, to like doing it well, so that you can have great relationships with people and share. This is my hope. This is totally what I believe in. So, I think we are in the end times as you understand it from the Bible, and that anytime after Jesus rose from the dead, this is it. It's like go time. I don't believe necessarily that means it's going to happen next week. It could, but yeah.
Right. So the one thing we know for certain is we want to be ready. And one of the things we say here at our church too is to just work with one eye on eternity. Have one eye on eternity.
I love that.
And it's like, it's not your full attention, meaning you're not like already living there where you're missing people and you're missing the mission. And we get to be part of the mission. And so, Josh, I love what you said, that are we living in the end times? Well, the answer only matters if it changes how you live and how you act. I love that. Yeah. And just saying, hey, like, if you look at that and you feel motivated to lean in and reach more people for Jesus, or maybe for the first time, consider, what am I going to do with Jesus?
Yeah.
How am I going to respond to him? I mean, that is the most important piece of it, is for you to decide, okay, like, maybe this shook me a little bit. Maybe it's waking me up a little bit. Now I need to decide, hey, what am I going to do with Jesus?
One eye on eternity. That's a great, because I didn't even think. I was like, wow, that is perfect. I was driving through town just last week, and I knew there was a person that I've been working with that is struggling with addiction, and I saw them. I saw out of the corner of my eye. I just saw them step into a vape shop, and in my head, I'm like, should I turn the car around, because I had to go somewhere. And I'm like, no. I went through a light, and I'm like, should I?
Mm.
And I'm like, is this God's voice?
Mm.
The should I? You know?
Yeah.
I think that's what we do. If we're living in the end times, it shouldn't be about like, should we have a chart? It should be, should I be listening to God's voice in my daily life? And so I turned around at the second light, and I just went in, and I'm like, hey, look, I don't want to be whatever, but I know this is something that's a struggle. And so are you good? Like, what are you doing here? You know? And oh, no, I was doing da-da-da, and that's cool. But like, that's what urgency should mean.
Yeah.
You know, it shouldn't be like browbeating people, posting things on YouTube, whatever. It should be in your life. Are you thinking like, man, I want this guy on the lifeboat.
Yes.
You know, I want him to be with me in heaven.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. If the kingdom of heaven is expanding, God's favorite way to expand it is with his followers and how we live.
Yeah, so good. And in that urgency, another way to say it is just have intentionality.
Yeah.
And it's like, why
Absolutely.
wait? Why wait? You know, if there's someone that you need to share that with, wait. It's when you have that eye on eternity. It's like when you're driving down the highway, you're always kind of glancing at the road signs to make sure you're headed in the right direction. You're aware of where you're headed, and you're not ignoring it, but you're also not consumed with it that you miss what's right in front of you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's really what there's so much more we could talk about this.
Yeah.
There's so much
Yeah.
more. And we
Yeah,
might
yeah.
need to talk more about it in the future and get back into some of the other topics, or, I'm sure there's things you're wondering, but what we're really trying to hit at right now is that main piece, is live with one eye on eternity, focus on what am I going to do with Jesus. And all if you haven't watched the other episodes, make sure you go back and watch them, because this whole mini series is meant to get into some of these difficult topics and questions, not to just fill your head with knowledge, not to make you right or to beat someone in an argument, but to arm you with wisdom and how to be ready and make a decision on what to do with Jesus for maybe the first time, or as a follower of Jesus, like how do I help other people bridge that gap for them to follow him? And so that really becomes the heart of this whole thing. Again, we're probably going to get into some more stuff in the future, but that's the heart of what we're meant to do. And so really appreciate you guys watching this, being part of these conversations.
It's been fun.
And thank you for your insights, your stories, your wisdom on
I'm gonna
this.
miss you guys.
It's been a good time.
Until
I don't want to do life without you.
next time. All right, guys, thank you so much, and live with one eye on the journey.